everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Are You Kidding Me? Podcast brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute. I am Naomi Schaefer-Riley, a resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
And I'm Ian Rowe, a visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute.
And today we are going to talk to you about the latest coronavirus subjects that everybody is interested in, particularly education. And so we have a couple of guests, and Ian is going to introduce them.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have two legendary leaders in education reform, two folks that I've learned a tremendous amount during my time as a leader in education. We have both Chris Cerf and Steve Wilson. Chris was Chancellor of Newark Schools, Deputy Chancellor in New York City, Superintendent of New Jersey Schools. Steve Wilson, former CEO of Ascend Learning. Both amazing guys who are thinking very critically about what is happening in our country in schools related to the coronavirus, and the fact that as crazy as we're in a situation now where millions of kids are engaged in some form of remote learning, and hopefully they are, some version of asynchronous learning, we know that this summer, the problem that already exists of summer learning loss will be even more acute, given that so many kids for these last few months have not been engaged in rigorous learning. So I know Chris and Stephen, you've done some great thinking about what should be happening this summer when parents, for example, lots of summer camps and normal summer activities are not going to be happening. So we literally could have millions of young people not engaged in any kind of serious learning or enrichment. Tell us your thoughts on what should be happening this summer.
Well, let me start, if I might, by sort of taking a sounding on...
That's Chris talking, by the way, everyone.
Thank you. Taking a little bit of a sounding on sort of where we are. The great majority of schools in the country essentially suspended brick and mortar operations, at least. There remains talk in a handful of states around coming back this spring, but there's very little expectation that will happen, at least in the substantial majority of places. The consequence of that, I think, are really twofold, and this really takes us to the question of summer. First of all, learning the reading, writing, and arithmetic, learning how to read well and learning how to do mathematics and science and so on, is a progressive process, and interruption in that process really has potentially long-term effects. And more broadly, it affects children disproportionately if they're already struggling to keep pace. The second thing to bear in mind is schools are more than just a place where formal learning takes place. They're a place where there's engagement, where there's an almost spiritual connection to the teacher and the other adults in the building, where people can learn how to collaborate, learn how to disagree, move their bodies in the form of calisthenics and exercise, and so on. And a lot of that is difficult to substitute with a purely remote solution. So the next window when we can think about bringing back some of those important features really is the summer. And so I think as a broad proposition, and I'll hand this back over to my colleague, Stephen, as a broad proposition, parents, educators, government officials should be thinking very, very hard about how to use the summer months as a way to continue to advance those core purposes.
I think that's exactly right, Chris. And I think it'd be useful to say that we know that most children are not able to access now the kind of instruction they need. The Center on Reinventing Public Education, where I'm a fellow, surveys districts every week to see their progress. And our last measure of this is that only about 27% of school districts are providing curriculum, instruction, and progress monitoring, right? So those are the essential ingredients for a serious take at moving children ahead academically. That means that 2/3 of students are not receiving education by which we can reasonably expect that serious progress will be made. The other thing we know is that parents are alarmed. If we look at a number of different surveys that have come out over the last 2 or 3 weeks, it shows extraordinary levels of parent anxiety about their children falling behind. Interestingly, most pronounced among low-income parents and parents of color. So we just simply have to act on this need, and this. I think really it's an emergency.
Those are the concerns that they have today about their kids in school now, where there's a whole infrastructure of teachers already expected to be teaching. How do you then address this in the summer when that same infrastructure is not actually in session?
Well, I think in a way it creates an opportunity, a word that we should use with hesitation in a crisis like this. But there is a chance for people that have been working in silos of organizations. They've been working in their own district. They've been working in a particular charter network and not been in conversation, not been in collaboration with others to come together to meet this need. And that's something that Chris and I are beginning to explore. But imagine if children around the country could be able to tap among the nation's best teachers, because after all, if you can teach 1 to 30, you can teach in many ways a much larger group of children all at once. And I think that's something that we need to give various thought to. Of course, there has to be the local teacher who has the relationship, who is looking at the work that they're producing, is providing the emotional support and the sense of family and community. But there are ways to approach this in a national way that could be extremely powerful. But what we do know is that we have to have an academically serious intervention in these crucial months before children return to school, even if they return to school at all in the form that we recognize it today. We can't lose these precious months.
I was going to ask, it's interesting because I think that a lot of the narrative that you're hearing now, both among folks in the education space, but also among people who are trying to counsel families and lower the rate of anxiety, is sort of saying to people, just chill out, your kids will be fine, we'll get through this, and, you're not going to turn into a homeschooler overnight, and, if we lose a few months, it'll be fine. I heard, I was listening to a family counselor the other day talking to people about after like a natural disaster, they measured kids a year later who had been out of school for 2 months and measured them a couple of years later and found that the kids, even the kids who had just been out of school completely, were actually doing just fine, if not better than their peers. So do you think that there's sort of too much of the kind of calm down element out there? And it's interesting what you said about who the parents are who are most concerned, because I think a lot of the focus has been on sort of the middle class anxiety about this. So can you sort of talk about why you think there's so much of the everything's going to be all right response right now?
Well, I think part of it is a real misimpression about how we are going to come back to normalcy. Both the media and certain elected officials are suggesting that there will be a moment when a switch is flipped, and whether it's May 15th or June 15th, the world will return back to its pre-existing order. And it's absolutely not going to work that way, as any, I think, sensible public health official will tell you. There are some populations that are medically fragile or especially vulnerable that can be defined by age. There are some individuals, as testing advances, who are have been exposed but are not yet showing symptoms. There are some who are actually ill. There are some populations where the virus is well under control, some regions, some not. So I think we can expect to see a staggered start, a start that maybe goes in waves, and that one that affects different populations differently at different times. So some of the folks going, well, this is not that big a deal. And frankly, I don't believe that is by any means the majority of folks out there, are perhaps operating under a slightly optimistic view that all we need to do is hold on there for another couple of weeks or a month or whatever the measure of time may be, and we'll be fine. The second thing I really think needs to be stressed, and one of the things that this pandemic is really casting a sharp light on in this country, is it is not affecting everybody equally. It's certainly not affecting people who have the means to stay at home for an extended period of time the same as someone who is living paycheck to paycheck, to be example. The disease itself is affecting different demographic groups differently. But the one I think we're focusing on podcast is children who are lagging in terms of their own learning for a variety of reasons that really have nothing to do with their choice, and research shows this convincingly, are most likely to be affected by an interruption in learning. And that is a really critical fact to bear in mind.
In terms of the summer school stuff, do you envision something that districts should do that would be mandatory, or parents would voluntarily sign up their kids? How would it work?
Well, I'm not a big mandatory guy on anything. I see how that sometimes doesn't work well. But here's what I think should happen. There should be created an absolutely enticing offering that has both a national dimension and a local dimension, where children are strongly encouraged to participate in an activity that's 4 or 5 hours a day, where they can essentially simulate the human experience of learning in a remote environment. It's not go off and do a digital workshop, but go off and take an adaptive test and come back and report back whether you gained 10 lexiles. It is problem solving together. It is collaboration exercises. It's virtual laboratories, stepping back and doing a yoga class or a calisthenic class, and I believe if that can be created, and Stephen and I believe that it can be created in a way that leverages the best teachers in the country to work with tremendous talent at the local level, and puts it all on a platform that allows for synchronous learning opportunities, it can be exciting, it can be enticing, it can be rewarding, it can be human. And I think that will, if that is done correctly, attract a very significant number of parents and children.
Got it. And the federal government is literally printing, trillions of dollars of stimulus. Where do the resources come from for something like this? How does this work? And if it were to come to be, would districts have to pay? Like, how would it work?
I don't think it's actually enormously expensive. I think that under the model that we're imagining, you have a core of master teachers, as Chris and I think of them, that, as Chris said, are drawn from many different organizations and who are enormously engaging, we could even say charismatic, clear, wonderful teachers. And who come across the screen with incredible intensity. And they're joined by, so that cost is low because as we said earlier, they could be reaching thousands, if not tens of thousands of students. So this is a very modest cost. At the district or local level, it's the cost of teachers who work for, say, a 5-week period this summer. This is something that, by the way, that districts and charter organizations already do, but it's very often a back of mind, insignificant in the scheme of things project. It doesn't receive the kind of attention that this moment requires. But there simply is no reason that we could not offer thousands of students exemplary education, really great education, and that's not happening today, and really through no one's fault. It's districts are not themselves equipped to suddenly turn on a dime and offer high quality virtual instruction. But we know what it takes because we have learned that if we really want to move kids fast, there are certain components of effective instruction which absolutely can be replicated in a virtual setting. And happy to talk about that. But these are things that we would like all children to experience, and we would like teachers across the land to be introduced to these extremely powerful techniques. I'm talking about the things that reverse the achievement gap. And it's entirely doable and it's scalable.
If you have a teacher teaching tens of thousands, I mean, it's not a participatory, it doesn't seem like it's a participatory experience. So, how do you sort of prevent it from just being like kids staring at a screen watching lecture?
Yeah, this is, Naomi, this is my fault in how I've described it. It is very much a participatory experience because the master teacher would be welcoming, of course, all of the children and would be presenting the key concept and leading the way. But the partner teachers in every locality would be working closely with their 30 or so or 20 children. And through the miracle of tools like Kami, a little known piece of technology that allows you to see exactly what the student's work is doing as they're marking up the problem or they're jotting on the poem in search of its meaning, the teacher can see exactly what is being produced. And by the way, that is one of what I would cite as the two essential elements of this very rapid-paced instruction, which is a tremendous focus on what students are actually creating. So if you were to sit in on one of these classes, what you would see is a blend of this exposition and leadership by the master teacher, and then a lot of student work. Most of the instructional time is students actually producing the work themselves and getting knee deep in the geometry proof and the exposition of the poem or the scientific experiment. So it's highly interactive. In fact, it has to be.
So if you were to create this infrastructure where master teachers are able to teach thousands, if not tens of thousands of kids, and then local teachers have more of a tutoring role in, reviewing individual work, that sounds like an incredible infrastructure that if it's durable enough, why wouldn't you want that to persist into the fall?
Ian, you can't say those things.
I mean, there might be some teachers' unions that might be upset about that, but it seems like that's a structure that if successful for 5 weeks in the summer, especially this fall, you'd want that to continue.
Yeah, Ian, let me take that on. So, and then let me merge your question with the last exchange. I deeply believe, and I know Stephen deeply believes, that this needs to be a teacher-centered modality. I almost hesitate to use the word virtual versus brick and mortar, because what you want to do is extract the power of human interaction and quality instruction. And then the modality through which it's delivered is frankly driven by circumstances like the presence of a pandemic. So I believe that the kind of thing Stephen and I are talking about, which would be, 5 weeks, 6 weeks in the summer, creates the foundation for a broader application in the fall. But I don't want that to be confused with a suggestion that that is a substitute for brick and mortar school, or that is, a new way of thinking about what school is. I believe what the country yearns for and the country needs is to be prepared to offer quality, interpersonal, engaging education that fosters curiosity, that supports collaboration, regardless of the public health circumstances we find ourselves in. And I believe that the work that we hope to be able to sponsor this summer could be a critical building block, if not a foundation, for essentially prepared for whatever eventuality presents itself in the fall. And as I noted before, I don't think it is likely that all of a sudden school will be open. I think different populations will be receiving their education by different means, in different ways for some time to the future.
All right. Well, we have to wrap things up. Where can people go to find out more about this, and how will we get any updates on whether this kind of summer school might be available?
Well, we hope to be announcing something in the next couple of weeks or so, and we will create a website for everyone to turn to. We don't have that ready to announce today, but we look forward to that moment, and we'll certainly let you both know.
I just want to add one thing, and that is, we absolutely view this to be a not-for-profit and to be something that is available philanthropically in terms of the sort of central delivery, with localities having to pick up local costs.
All right. Well, I hope some donors out there are listening.
Yeah.
So thank you both.
Seems like a worthwhile philanthropic investment for sure.
Thank you both very much for coming on to Are You Kidding Me? This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute. You can download it at the American Enterprise Institute website, aei.org, or wherever you get your podcasts. So I am Naomi Schaefer-Riley.
And I'm Ian Rowe.
Thanks so much for joining us.